Good evening, my friends. Woof, got a little chilly, but a beautiful day out there today. Absolutely beautiful. Got out for a couple miles, had a faculty meeting. We'll talk about that later. Um, Not that there's really a lot of news to report, but, um, you know, it's Monday, first Monday of the month. So we have a faculty meeting. I think at one point there was 87 people in the Google Meet. So that was a little nutty. That really was kind of a little nutty. There, there's a thing called Google Grid. Yeah, Google Grid, and you can type in your browser, open up a new tab, and say install Google Grid when you're in Google Meet. Or actually, I don't think you need to be in Google Meet to install it. And that doesn't make sense. You don't have to be. But if you open up a browser, if you open up another tab while you're in Google Chrome, that's what I meant to say. Then you type install Google Grid. It'll turn on this thing, which I think is really more of an add-on. And that add-on then makes like the Brady Bunch, like Hollywood Squares. So everybody in the meeting has their own little cube. And today, when I turned it on, like, there was just all these little people all over my screen. So, oh, excuse me. So that was a little goofy, but anyway, I'm excited. We have a new book to start tonight. Hopefully, I'll be honest, I hope that it's the last book that we read together, but if we have to read a third, then we read a third. What are you going to do? But when we were leaving each other, we were talking about all these incredible things that were coming together when we left each other. Did I say when we leave each other? When we left each other. All these incredible things were coming together, right? Urbanization, immigration, industrialization booming. And our cities are kind of a mess, right? Our cities are just garbage run, overrun, just not a happy place to be. And what happens across the country is that a group of people stand up to start to expose a lot of the problems, and a lot of them are writers. One of them is a gentleman by the name of Upton Sinclair. We're going to read his book tonight, and he is very frustrated with the meatpacking industry in Chicago. So this book is a reflection of what's going on, and as a result of this book, Upton Sinclair influences enough Americans and President Teddy Roosevelt, and we see a new law that is going to be passed as a result of this book being written and becoming so popular. The Meat Inspection Act, not long after the Pure Food and Drug Act. So, two laws greatly influenced by this book. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I thought I had a copy of The Jungle, and at one point in time, I definitely did. I tried to get one on Amazon, couldn't. So I am actually reading tonight from my Kindle Paperwhite. Is I think what the Paperwhite? Yeah, I think it's called the Paperwhite. And I've tried before. Excuse me. Oh my goodness, excuse me. I've tried before reading books from Kindles, and I really didn't enjoy it. I really like to have a book in my hand. And I've noticed something very odd about my reading, reading as a hobby, reading as a love, is that I found when I read, and I think this is odd, when I read paperbacks, I read slower. When I read hardcover books, I don't know what it is, but I am just drawn to having like a hardcover book in my hand. And if I get a hardcover copy of a book, bam, I just start banging through it. I just start reading it. I don't, and again, I'm not really sure what that is. Like, obviously, it's something upstairs mentally going on that I just love the feel of the book. And I've read hundreds of paperback books, plenty of paperback books, but for some reason, I just like to have the hardcover. So, in the summertime, I work at a farmer's market over at in Colony, and they have a book nook there, and they sell hardcover books for I think it's $1 for a hardcover book and 50 cents for a paperback. So I will often go over there if I get a little bit of a break and go through the hardcover books. And sometimes I actually wait. Like, I don't mind going to Barnes and Nobles and getting a book, Barnes and Noble, excuse me, and getting a book. But sometimes, like if I'm looking for an older book, I'll wait and hunt around until I find a hard copy to read. But anyways, enough with weird Mr. Martin stuff. But tonight we're going to read from the Paperwhite, and I guess the thing that I like about the Paperwhite is that it kind of feels like a hardcover book. And I know it's like when you guys see it, it's just like, well, wait a minute, hold on. No, you can't see it any better. Never mind. It's kind of looks like a page. Like, it's not super bright and glossy and shiny. It kind of looks like the page of a book. So I don't get how some people, like, I know some people read books on their phones. Hells no. I couldn't do it. But anyway, here we go. And I'm going to tell you, my friends, right now, this book, some of the characters are, a lot of the characters are Eastern European. So there are some last names here that don't have any consonants, right? Or I mean, there's no vowels, and there's like a lot of Z's. So it's the last names are the last names are a little odd. So anyways, we'll get to reading with the you'll have to just bear with me when we get reading through these last names. Okay. So here we go. Hi, Chris. How are you? It was 4:00 when the ceremony was over and the carriages began to. Of course, this is the problem with our Kindles. Please don't tell me my Kindle just died. It didn't. It just, okay, it turned off. Ha! It was 4:00 when the ceremony was over and the carriages began to arrive. There had been a crowd following all the way, owing to the exuberance of Marija Bersinauskas. The occasion rested heavily upon Marija's broad shoulders. It was her task to see that all things went in due form, and after the best home traditions, and, flying wildly hither and thither, bowling everyone out of the way, and scolding and exhorting all day with her tremendous voice. Marija was too eager to see that others conformed to the proprieties to consider them herself. She had left the church last of all, and desiring to arrive first at the hall, had issued orders to the coachman to drive faster. When that personage had developed a will of his own in the matter, Marija had flung up the window of the carriage and, leaning out, proceeded to tell him her opinion of him, first in Lithuanian, which he did not understand, and then in Polish, which he did. Having the advantage of her in altitude, the driver had stood his ground and even ventured to attempt to speak, and the result had been a furious altercation which, continuing all the way down Ashland Avenue, had added a new swarm of urchins to the cordage, at each side street for half a mile. This was unfortunate, for already there had been a throng before the door. The music had started up, and half a block away you could hear the dull broom broom of a cello. with the squeaking of two fiddles which vied from each other in intricate and altunious gymnastics. Seeing the throng, Marija abandoned precipitately the debate concerning the ancestors of her coachman, and springing from the moving carriage, plunged into and proceeded to clear a way to the hall. Once within, she turned and began to push the other way, roaring in the meantime, "Eek, eek, Udzdarak Dubri," in tones which made the orchestral uproar sound like fairy music. So, yeah, this is interesting. I'm not Lithuanian or Polish or Russian, and I don't speak any of these languages. So, when we get to these moments, it's going to be a little weird. Zigrazunius Palinsk Minumeriums Daras Vinus Zapas Wines and Liquor Union Headquarters. That was the way the signs ran. The reader, who perhaps had never much held to converse in the language of far-off Lithuanian, will be glad of the explanation that the place was the rear room of a saloon in the part of Chicago known as the Back of Yards. This information is definite and suited to the matter of fact, but how pitifully inadequate it would have seemed to one who understood that it was also the supreme hour of ecstasy in the life of one's God's gentlest creatures, the scene of the wedding feast, and the transfiguration of little Ona Lakoziate. There we go. We're going to all know Lithuanian by the time this book's over. She stood in the doorway, shepherded by cousin Marija, breathless from pushing through the crowd, and her happiness painful to look upon. There was a light of wonder in her eyes, and her lids trembled. Her otherwise wan little face was flushed. She wore a muslin dress, conspicuously white, and a stiff little veil coming to her shoulders. There were 5 pink paper roses twisted into the veil, and 11 bright green rose leaves. There were new white cotton gloves upon her hands, and as she stood staring about her stood staring about her, she twisted them together feverishly. It was almost too much for her. You could see the pain of too great emotion on her face, and all the tremor of her form. She was so young, not quite 16, and small for her age, a mere child. She had just been married, and married to Jurgis, pronounced, as it says in the book, Hjorgis, of all men, Hjorgis Rudkis. He with the white flower in the buttonhole of his new black suit. He with the mighty soldiers of shoulders and the giantest of hands. Ona was blue-eyed and fair, while Hjorgis had great black eyes with beating brows, thick black hair that curled in waves about his ears. In short, they were one of those incongruous and impossible married couples with which Mother Nature so often wills to confound all prophets, before and after. Hjorgis could take up a 250-pound quarter of beef and carry it into a car without a stagger, or even a thought. And now he stood in a far corner, frightened as a hunted animal, and obliged to moisten his lips with his tongue, each time before he could answer the congratulations of his friends. Gradually, there was effected a separation between the spectators and the guests, a separation of the least sufficiently completed for working purposes. There's no time during the festivities which ensued when there were not groups of onlookers in the doorways and the corners. And if any one of these onlookers came sufficiently close or looked sufficiently hungry, a chair was offered to him, and he was invited to the feast. It was one of the laws of the Veselia that no one goes hungry. And while a rule was made in the forests of Lithuania, is hard to apply in the stockyard districts of Chicago, with its 250,000 inhabitants. Still, they did their best. and the children who ran in from the street, and even the dogs went out happier again. A charming informality was one of the characteristics of this celebration. The men wore their hats, or if they wished, they took them off, and their coats with them. They ate when and where they pleased, and moved as often as they pleased. There were to be speeches and singing, but no one had to listen who did not care to. If he wished, meantime, to speak or sing himself, he was perfectly free. The resulting medley of sound distracted no one, save possibly alone the babies, of which there were present a number equal to the total possessed by all the guests invited. There was no other place for the babies to be, and so part of the preparations for the evening consisted of a collection of cribs and carriages in one corner. In these the babies slept, three or four together, or wakened together as the case might be. Those who were still older and could reach the tables marched about munching contentedly at meat bones and at bologna sausages. The room was about 30 feet square. Jeez, hello, that's not big. With whitewashed walls, bare save for a calendar, a picture of a racehorse, and a familiar tree in a gilded frame. To the right, there was a door from the saloon, with a few loafers in the doorway, and the corner beyond it a bar, with the presiding genius clad in soiled white, with wax black mustaches, and a carefully oiled curl plastered against one side of his forehead. So, kind of like a Superman, right? That curl. Wow, old school Superman had that curl right on his forehead. I never did that, and I'm not going to do that. In the opposite corner are two tables, filling a third of the room and laden with dishes and cold viands. V-I-A-N, viands. Viands. I wonder what that means. Which are a few of the, here we go. Which are a few of the hungrier guests are already munching. At the head, where sits the bride, a snow white cake with an Eiffel Tower of constructed decoration, with sugar cones and two angels upon it, and a generous sprinkling of pink and green and yellow candies. Beyond opens a door into a kitchen where there is a glimpse to be had of a range which much steam ascended from. Many women, old and young, rushing hither and thither. In the corner to the left, there are three musicians upon a little platform, toiling heroically to make some impression upon the hubbub. Also, the babies, similarly occupied, and an open window whence the populace imbibes the sights and the sounds and the odors. Suddenly, some of the steam begins to advance, and peering through it, you discern Aunt Elizabeth, Ona's stepmother, Teda Ebiete, as they call her, bearing aloft a great platter of stewed duck. Behind her is Kotrina, making her way cautiously, staggering beneath a similar burden. And half a minute later, there appears old grandmother. Oh my goodness, look at this name. Maja Zonkini, with a big yellow bowl of smoking potatoes, nearly as big as herself. So, bit by bit, the feast takes form. There is a ham and a dish of sauerkraut, boiled rice, macaroni, bologna sausages, great piles of penny buns, bowls of milk, foaming pitchers of beer. There is also, not 6 feet from your back, the bar, where you may order all you please and do not have to pay for it. Itski, Grazuzia, screams Marija, and falls to work herself. For there is more upon the stove inside that will be spoiled if not eaten. Somebody remind me when we get to current events about my first trip to Poland. I want to talk to you guys about it. So, with laughter and endless, with the laughter and shouts and endless badinage and merriment, the guests take their places. The young men, who for the most part have been huddled near the door, summon their resolution in advance. And the shrinking Jorgis is poked and scolded by old folks until he consents to seat himself at the right hand of the bride. The two bridesmaids, whose insignia of office are paper wreaths, come next, and after them the rest of the guests, old and young, boys and girls. The spirit of the occasion takes hold of the stately bartender, who condescends to a plate of stewed duck. Even the fat policeman, whose duty it will be later in the evening to break up the fights, draws a chair to the foot of the table, and the children shout and the babies yell, and everyone laughs and sings and chatters, while above the deafening clamor, Cousin Marijah shouts orders to the musicians. This Cousin Marijah boy, holy cow. Excuse me, she can crack the whip there. The musicians, how shall one begin to describe them? At this time, they've been there playing a mad frenzy. All of the scene must be read or said or sung to music. It is the music which makes it what it is. It is the music which changes the place from the rear room of the saloon in the back of the yards to a fairy place, a wonderland, a little corner of high mansions of society. So they're doing everything they can, even though this is kind of like a poor cultural center kind of, place where all these people come together. When they add all these things to it, it's like a mansion, right? To them, it's like a beautiful place where beautiful things are happening. So cool. Good for them. The little person who leads this trio is an inspired man. His fiddle is out of tune, and there is no rosin on his bow, but still he is an inspired man. The hands of the muses have been laid upon him. He plays like one possessed by a demon, by a whole horde of demons. You can feel him in the air around him, capering frenetically with the invisible feet. They set the pace. And the hair of the leader of the orchestra rises on end, and his eyeballs start from their sockets as he toils to keep up with them. Oh my goodness, look at this one. Timosius Kuzlieka is his name, and he has taught himself to play the violin by practicing all night after working all day in the killing beds. He is in his shirt sleeves with a vest figured with faded gold horseshoes and a pink striped shirt, suggestive of peppermint candy. A pair of military trousers, light blue with yellow stripes, serve to give that suggestion of authority proper to the leader of the band. He is only about 5 feet high, but even so, these trousers are about 8 inches short of the ground. You wonder where he could have gotten them, or rather, you would wonder if the excitement of being in the presence left you time to think of much things. For he is an inspired man. Every inch of him is inspired. You might almost say inspired separately. He stamps with his feet, he tosses his head, he sways and swings to and fro. He has a wizened up little face, irresistibly comical, and when he executes or turns a flourish, his brows knit and his lips work and his eyes wink. The very ends of his necktie bristle out. And every now and then he turns upon his companions, nodding, signaling, beckoning frantically, with every inch of him appealing, imploring in behalf of the muses and their call. For they are hardly worthy of Tamozosius, the other two members of the orchestra. The second violin is a Slovak, a tall, gaunt man with black rimmed spectacles and the mute and patient look of an overridden mule. He responds to the whip but feebly, and then always falls back into his old rut. The third man is very fat with a round, red, sentimental nose, and he plays with his eyes turned up to the sky and a look of infinite yearning. He is playing a bass part. He is playing a bass part upon his cello, and so the excitement is nothing to him. No matter what happens in the treble, it is his task to saw out one long drawn and laborious note after another, from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until the same hour the next morning, for his third of the total income of $1 per hour. Whoa, $1 per hour. Yikes! You guys thought you were getting paid bad, getting paid poorly. Mm-mm-mm. Okay, so before the feast has been 5 minutes underway, Tamosius has risen in his excitement. A minute or two more, and you can see that he is beginning to edge towards the tables. His nostrils are dilated, and with his breath come and his breath comes fast. His demons are driving him. He nods and shakes his head at his companions, jerking at them with his violin, until at last the long form of the second violinist also rises up. In the end, all three of them begin advancing step by step upon the banqueters. The Len, oh my goodness, these names. Velaten, Velentinazia, the cellist, bumping along with his instrument between notes. Finally, all three are gathered at the foot of the tables, where the Tamosius, where Tamosius mounts upon a stool. Maybe we should give him nicknames. Maybe that should be Tamo. Now he is in his glory, dominating the scene. Some of the people are eating, some are laughing, some are talking. But you will make a great mistake if you think there is one of them who does not hear him. His notes are never true, and his fiddle buzzes on the low ones and squeaks and scratches on the high. But these things he heeds no more than they heed the dirt and noise and squalor about them. It is out of this material that they have to build their lives. With it, they have to utter their souls. And this is their utterance, merry and boisterous, or mournful and wailing, or passionate and rebellious. This music is their music. It is the music of home. It stretches out its arms to them. They have only to give themselves up. Chicago and its saloons and its slums fade away. There are green meadows and sunlit rivers, mighty forests and snow-clad hills. They behold home landscapes and childhood scenes returning. Old loves and friendships begin to waken, old joys and griefs to laugh and weep. Some fall back and close their eyes, some beat upon the table. Now and then one leaps up with a cry and calls out for this song or that. And then the fire leaps brighter in Tamo's eyes, and he flings up his fiddle and shouts to his companions. And away they go in mad career. The company takes up the choruses. The men and women cry out like all possessed. Some leap to their feet and stamp upon the floor, lifting their glasses and pledging each other. Before long, it occurs to someone to demand an old wedding song, which celebrates the beauty of the bride and the joys of love. In the excitement of this masterpiece, Tamo begins to edge in between the tables, making his way toward the head where sits the bride. There is not a foot of space between the chairs of the guests, and Tamos is so short that he pokes them with the bow whenever he reaches over for the low notes. But still he presses in and insists relentlessly that his companions must follow. During their progress, needless to say, the sounds of the cello are pretty well extinguished. But at last, the three are all at the head of the table, and Tamos takes his station at the right hand of the bride and begins to pour out his soul in melting strains. Little Ona is too excited to eat. Once in a while, she tastes a little something when Cousin Marija pinches her elbow and reminds her. But for the most part, she sits gazing with the same fearful eyes of wonder. Teta is all in a flutter, like a hummingbird. Her sisters, too, keep running up behind her, whispering, breathless. But Ona seems scarcely to hear them. The music keeps calling, and the far-off look comes back. She sits with her hands pressed together over her heart. Then the tears begin to come into her eyes. She is ashamed to wipe them away and ashamed to let them run down her cheeks. She turns and shakes her head a little, then flushes red when she sees that Yorgos is watching her. When in the end, Tamos has reached her side and is waving his magic wand above her. Oh no, there's a song coming up. Ona's cheeks are scarlet, and she looks as if one would have to get up and run away. If she would have to get up and run away. In this crisis, however, she is saved by Marija, whom the muses suddenly visit. Marija is fond of song, a song of lovers parting. She wishes to hear it, and the musicians do not know it. As the musicians do not know it, she has risen and is proceeding to teach them. Marija is short but powerful in build. She works in a canning factory, and all day long she handles cans of beef that weigh 14 pounds. She has a broad Slovak face with prominent red cheeks. When she opens her mouth, it is tragic, but you cannot help but thinking of a horse. She wears a blue flannel shirtwaist, which is now rolled up to the sleeves, disclosing her brawny arms. She has a carving fork in her hand, with which she pounds on the table to mark the time. As she roars her song in a voice of which is enough to say that it leaves no portion of the room vacant, the three musicians follow her, laboriously and note by note, but averaging one note behind. Excuse me. Thus they toil through stanza after stanza of a lovesick swain's lamentation. Oh boy, this is going to be fun. Sudev Kvecelli to Bragosius. Sudiev Erlame Man Bind Naim. Matayu Paskiri Tiep Ascuasius Jogvart Ansvet Rate Vietnam. Thank goodness that's over. When the song was over, it is time for a speech. An old Dade Antanas rises to his feet. Grandfather Anthony, Yorgis's father, is not more than 60 years of age, but you would think that he was 80. He had been only 6 months in America, and the change has not done him good. In his manhood, he worked in a cotton mill. But then a coughing fell upon him, and he had to leave. Out in the country, the trouble disappeared, but he has been working in a pickle room at Durham's, and the breathing of the cold, damp air has brought it back. Now he rises, and he is seized with a coughing fit, and holds himself by the chair and turns away to wan and batter his face until it passes. This took a turn. Yeah, woof. I'm not a Lithuanian. I can't do it. One day I'll practice. Generally, it is the custom of speech at a Volazia to be taken out of one of the books and learned by heart. But in his youthful days, Dade Antanas used to be a scholar and really make up all the love letters of his friends. Now it is understood that he has composed an original speech of congratulation and benediction, and this is one of the events of the day. Even the boys who are romping around the room draw near and listen, and some of the women sob and wipe their aprons in their eyes. It is very solemn, for Antanas has become possessed of the idea that he is not much longer to stay with his children. His speech leaves them all all tearful that one of the guests, Jokubas Svedvilas, who keeps a delicatessen store on Halsted Street and is fat and hearty, is moved to rise and say that things may not be as bad as that, and then to go on and make a little speech on his own, in which he showers congratulations and prophecies of happiness upon the bride and groom. Proceeding to particulars with great delight, the young men, which greatly delight, the young men, but which cause Anna to blush once more furiously than ever. Jokubas possesses that his wife complacently describes as Piotska Vinditur, a poetical imagination. Now, a good many of the guests have finished, and since there is no pretense of ceremony, the banquet begins to break up. Some of the men gather about the bar, some wander about, laughing and singing. Here and there will be a little group chanting merrily and in sublime indifference to the others and to the orchestra as well. Everybody is more or less restless. One could guess that something is on their minds, and so it proves. The last tardy diners are scarcely given time to finish before the table and the debris are shoved into a corner, and the chairs and the babies piled out of the way, and the real celebration of the evening begins. Then Thomas, after replenishing himself with a pot of beer, returns to his platform and, standing up, reviews the scene. He taps authoritatively upon the side of his violin, then tucks it carefully under his chin. Then he waves his bow in an elaborate flourish, and finally smites the sounding strings and closes his eyes, and floats away in spirit upon the wings of a dreamy waltz. His companions follow, but with his eyes open, watching where he treads, and so to speak. And finally, oh boy, here's another big one. Valentinazia, after waiting for a little and beating with his feet to get the time, casts upon his eyes to the ceiling and begins to saw. Vroom, vroom, vroom. The company pairs off quickly, and the whole room is soon in motion. Apparently, nobody knows how to waltz, but that is nothing of any consequence. There is music, and they dance, each as he pleases. Just before they sang, most of them prefer the two-step, especially the young, with whom it is in fashion. The older people have dances from home, strange and complicated steps, which they execute with grave solemnity. Some do not dance anything at all, but simply hold each other's hands and allow the undisciplined joy of motion to express itself with their feet. Among these are Jacobus and his wife, Lucija, who together keep the delicatessen store and consume nearly as much as they sell. They are too fat to dance, but they stand in the middle of the floor, holding each other fast in their arms, rocking slowly from side to side. Oh my goodness, we're flying through. And grinning seraphically, a picture of toothless and perspiring ecstasy. Okay, let me, I need to learn how to, here we go. All right, I know how to bookmark my Kindle. Wow. So we have, we're flying through this, guys. I'm sorry. I kind of lost us here, and I didn't realize how far we had gotten. But we will pick up there. All right. So, what's going on in the world? Well, there's a lot going on in the world, and there's a lot going on in our book, right? These Eastern European, right? These Slavic people who are very much about community. They are very much about home. We talked about, when we talked about immigration, that as immigrants came to our country, they went to what they called life raft communities, meaning that, and I can give you a modern day example. When I went to Poland and Belarus, one of our translators, his name is Konstantin. And Konstantin, the nickname for Konstantin is Kostya. So if you ever hear a Russian or Eastern European called Kostya, his full name is Konstantin. So anyways, he moved to America. And when he moved to America, he's actually Belarusian. He moved to a suburb of Colorado, and he had actually told me that he had looked at a suburb of Cleveland. And where you go, if you go to these suburbs and you were to walk into like a grocery store, kind of more like Gabriel's, like they don't have big like Price Choppers and stuff like that. But when you go in, things are written in English and Belarusian. So that's how many people from Belarus live in these communities. So anyway, that's what these people are doing, right? They've come to Chicago and they're moving into neighborhoods together where you'd probably more likely to hear people speaking Lithuanian than speaking English. And there are still parts of our country that are that way. I mean, there's no doubt. There are still places, like I said, where my friend lives outside of Denver, that are that way. So cool stuff going on. Immigrants pouring into Chicago, living in their little life raft community. So you know exactly what's going on in our what we're talking about in U.S. history. So I have this big old page of current events, guys, and I don't know, it's going to be tough to get through it. We got a lot going on. So obviously, let's start with the big thing here. No regions, done. Here's the bad part. Well, the good part is we know. The bad part is we don't know what that means for graduation, right? It doesn't answer the question, do I need to pass the U.S. history regents to graduate? My gut tells me that yes, you do. It means that at some point before graduation, you're going to have to take that regents. Maybe you take it in August. Maybe you take it next January. I don't know. I don't know what that means, but apparently we're going to know tomorrow night. So tomorrow night, we could really have a lot of information flowing out about, what our year is, the end of our year is going to look like and what next year is going to look like. So our numbers today in New York, let's do the United States. So 350,000 Americans have tested positive. Just around 10,500 have passed away. New York has 131,000 of those cases. Just under 5,000 people have passed away. Now, last night we talked about, and guys, if you have questions, please throw them out there or comments. It doesn't matter. Yesterday we talked about the governor said, hey, we might be seeing something good here. The number of cases are dropping comparatively. The more people are being let out of the hospital, the number of people dying each day looks like it's gone down. And I guess we've had a second day of that. So it could be a blip. It could be a true sign. But I'm trying and I urge that everybody maybe hang out. Let's, give this a couple days and really see what happens. If in 5 days, oh my goodness, excuse me, if in 5 days things are still looking like this, then that could be, it could really, really be a good sign. But we are still closed. We are not going back to school in April, right? Schools are officially shut down until April 29th. But what they're saying is that New York and maybe across the country, but I'm not sure about this. This could be the worst week when it comes to people being hit. And I guess, with this, and they know that because the amount of people that, I guess they're looking at the amount of people that have been admitted to the hospital, the ones that are in the hospital, the ones that are on the ventilator. I guess the longer that you stay on the ventilator, the less likely you are to actually survive. So they kind of are looking at all these factors and saying, this could be a bad week. And one of the things I was looking at right before I jumped on tonight was, where is it here? New York. So in New York, I guess it's called SUNY Downstate Hospital. There was a news crew, and in just 3 hours, I don't know if any of you guys saw this, in 3 hours, that they were there reporting 6 patients coded, which means for one reason or another, their heart stopped, they stopped breathing, and 4 of them died. And they had an interview. So this is just in a 3 hour period in just one hospital. 4 people died. And they were talking to one of the doctors, and one of the doctors was saying that, normally on a 12-hour shift, you might have one person code, maybe two, but usually you don't lose them. But now, every day, this is what's happening. These doctors are experiencing this, is that in just a few hours, they're having, a half dozen people code, where you've probably seen on a movie, right? The thing kind of flatlines. And so, one of the things that I was thinking about is PTSD, right? Post traumatic stress disorder. After 9/11, a lot of the nurses, a lot of the first responders that for days were on the scene at the World Trade Center, that were digging through the rubble, that were finding victims, right? For years, those people suffered from post traumatic stress. And I, personally know someone that was a nurse up here in Albany. It was a friend of my wife's at the time, and she actually left Albany to go down and help in New York City. And for quite some time, she was having a lot of problems. And one time, she was almost in a really bad car accident. She was driving down 787, and there was something in the middle of the road. And what she thought it was a person that had been covered in the dust and the rubble and everything from the towers collapsing. So, her mind had kind of taken over, and she was having this kind of flashback to when she was helping. So, thinking long term, and again, this isn't a bad thing. We PTSD has been around forever, right? But now we have ways to deal with it. And I think that right now, forward thinking, right? We're going to get through this. We are going to come out of it. We are going to lose people. But let's look to the people that really helped get us through this, and let's really start to plan on how to help them. Because I think that a lot of nurses and doctors, that when we get through this, they're going to need some help. They're going to need emotional support. They're going to need time off. They're going to need for us to, be patient with them. I think being a member of the medical field is, I don't think I could do it, right? And a lot of reasons that I don't think I could do it. I'm not squeamish about blood and poop and all that kind of stuff. If you're a parent, you're okay with vomit, you're okay with, well, I don't want to say you're okay with it, but you know how to deal with it, right? So that kind of stuff doesn't bother me. But I don't know. I just think that I greatly admire people in the medical profession. So let's keep an eye on them moving forward, because I think they're going to need our help. Okay, so here's one of the things that the governor is saying, though, which again, we're seeing some good signs, and we're seeing some signs that are like, okay. So even though they're calling it now New York pause, right? They've hit the old pause button. So even though we're on this pause and things look like they might be doing okay, the governor is also saying that too many people are still not social distancing. So he is considering upping the fine. And I guess this is in certain areas of the state, that if you do not social distance, he's upping the fine from $500 to $1,000. Last night we talked about Saratoga County is already doing their own county fines, which was it $250? I think that we said in Saratoga County. Let's stay on New York. There's a lot of New York stuff. Excuse me. Okay. So here's something I was watching the governor's. I don't know if you guys saw this. Uh, I I was watching the governor's press conference today, and a reporter asked him a question, and the question was, "Is New York City going to start burying coronavirus victims in parks in the city?" And the governor kind of like did like a what? What are you talking about, right? So I guess that someone, whether it was on Twitter or whatever, had started to put out, and I guess it is true that in New York, what they're doing is they're taking people that have died of the coronavirus, and they're kind of putting them, I guess, in like these mobile kind of trailers, keeping their bodies cold and keeping them separated from everybody else. But I guess there's this fear that that space might run out. But I guess that the reason I bring it up is that this is one of the things that I wish we could go back and talk to, the framers of our Constitution, the people that wrote the Bill of Rights, right? We have the freedom of the press, right? We have the freedom of an open society where media can report what's happening in the government. They report it to us, right? A well informed constituency, meaning us, the people that vote, usually elect good leaders. And one of the things, it's frustrated me at times, and please chime in here, guys, if you agree. And I'm not talking necessarily about Facebook, but moments in our nation's history where some pretty serious things have happened and some really bad reporting is happening. And I think it's happening to just grab people, grab attention, grab headlines. And it's kind of like yellow journalism, right? It's clickbait. It's people are putting some crazy headline out there. So you click on the computer and you go to their website and you read their news and you see their sponsors. And I think, the one time where it really upset me was when the Sandy Hook Elementary, the Newtown shooting took place. And all of these news agencies were reporting all of this crazy stuff, like snipers surrounded the school, and all this different stuff was happening. And I'm just saying, who knows how many families have just lost their kindergartners? How many families have just lost their elementary school students, their children? And these news agencies are throwing out these headlines that they have no facts to support. Um, and it really upsets me. So when we hear news, it's always good. And I'll be honest, I don't know if you guys can see what I do here, right? But I try to collect news through the day, and then what I do is about a half hour before I go live, I go back and I take another look, and I say, okay, were they right when they got this, when they made this call? But we live in this world where it's like we got to know, we got to know, we got to know, we got to know, and a lot of times people don't go back and they don't check. So I don't know. To me, it's frustrating. How a lot of this stuff it fuels I don't know, it fuels an actual uninformed constituency, right? Because people start grabbing on to all these little catchphrase headlines and they lock into it and they set it in their mind, uh, and they won't follow up. So anyways, I guess I'll get off my soapbox. um, New York, we've talked about the economy. In New York, on in during 2008, during the Great Recession, the worst day of unemployment claims in New York State was 13,000 people. So as the stock market was crashing, as the housing market was crashing, One day in New York State, 13,000 people applied for unemployment on the same day. So apparently on Friday, four times that number applied for unemployment. So the state has started to hire people to bring in to help with this, right? We've got to help people apply. The computer systems are being overrun. And so what does that mean, right? That means 52,000 people on Friday applied for unemployment, 52,000 people in New York State alone. And I want to go back because I know at one night somebody had asked a question about not unemployment, but jobs and who small businesses could hire back in regards to full-time employee versus part-time employee. And I have not found any information on that yet. Again, the SBA loans, there's uncertainty and there's things that just aren't very clear. So the government is still starting to work that out, but those loans are going out, and I don't want to. I don't want to say, I didn't forget it, and it might have been Veronica who asked. I'm still trying to find information about that. We've talked about the shift from New York State in regards to the hardest hit places. It looks to me like here's the three other hardest hit places. Number one, and it makes sense, New Jersey, our neighbor. A lot of people that live in New York City or work in New York City, live in New Jersey. So it's obvious that that transmission was going to take place. But in Michigan, this could be the real new epicenter of this. A lot of doctors in Michigan are basically saying we have days of medical supplies. In just a few days, they're going to be out of masks. They're going to be out of gowns, these face shields. They're going to be out of these things that they need. And I think a lot of attention has focused there. And then in Louisiana. We'll keep an eye on those parts of our country. And even in California, apparently California is kind of like us. They're kind of seeing it's still going up, but it's kind of not going up as quickly as it had been. Okay, what else do I have? Okay. So SUNY Albany, remember yesterday we talked about that mobile testing station. Here it is, guys. If you need wait a minute, I could type it. The number is 888-364-3065. So this is for the SUNY drive up testing. So if you, my friends, feel like, or someone that needs some help, okay, they think they're sick, this is a number to call, and they're going to give you a time where you can drive up and you can be tested. Okay, Christina, here we go. My mom works for unemployment, and she says she has. Oh, I think you meant nonstop. She has nonstop work and is doing tons of overtime. Cuomo didn't even pay the state workers, which is confusing because doesn't he want people to spend money? Right. So I know what you mean. And let's remember, Christina, I know how you're feeling and I understand it, but it's not just the governor, and I'm not defending him. It's not just the governor that passes the budget. It's the state assembly and it's the state senate. And they have, to this point, passed that budget. So the state workers should be paid and they shouldn't lose a dime. But you're right. And I understand what you're saying, right? It makes a lot of sense. We've got tens of thousands of people that are losing their jobs, tens of thousands of people that need to file for unemployment, and the people that have to help them get the unemployment aren't being paid. So this is why we should pay attention to government. And Christina, I'm super proud that you bring that up. It's like, wait a minute, let's get some priorities straight here, people, right? If we've got to help other people, well, the people that are helping the other people, we've got to pay them. They're doing their jobs. So awesome. Bonus points for Christina. I am playing K-pop tomorrow night just for Christina. I'm going to find the song and I'm playing it. Good for you, Christina. Thanks for throwing that out there. Oh, that is a teacher. I might get a little emotional here and cry up or tear up. I'm really glad you brought that up. Okay, here we go. So a big Siena poll was released today. So Siena, and I told you this maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. They have some of their science students that are studying statistics, and their political science students. They work together. They started the Siena Research Institute. I don't know, maybe it's 13, 14 years old. And they asked New Yorkers today how they felt. 87% of New Yorkers that were polled believe that what's happening right now is going to have a significant impact on their lives. Yeah, I would agree with that. That's probably good. 51% of New Yorkers are very afraid that they're not going to be able to keep up with their bills. Okay. I honestly thought that number would be a little higher. I thought it probably would be maybe not that much higher, but maybe closer to 60%. 46% of the people polled said that they fear as though in the upcoming weeks they are going to lose their jobs. That number to me is a little higher than I thought. I kind of thought that would be a little bit lower. I think a lot of people have already, and this is why, is because I thought the apex of people losing jobs we were past it, right? I mean, bam, like in the first 2 weeks, we just saw so many people lose their jobs. And I kind of thought things had flatlined, and hopefully they have. And this doesn't mean they are losing their jobs. It means 46% of people polled think that they're going to lose their job. Now, out of all the people that were asked and were polled, 42% of people are self-quarantining, right? Meaning that they are not going outside at this moment. We're locked in. We ain't going outside, right? It doesn't matter what. 39% of the people polled are saying they are strictly social distancing. 5% of the people, and I've got to pull up a picture for you here, 5% of the people say that, we don't really believe what's happening is happening, and we're just going to kind of go out and do our thing. So they're not really buying that this is something to worry about. And I will tell you that not only am I social distancing, but you guys know about my dad. My dad is blind, and and I go and I help him out, and he's doing great. He really is. And I don't know if you guys can see this, but the other day I went to the store for him, and you really can't see. Let me try this again. Is that no? Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Now you could see it for a second. Anyways, so I went out to the store and I had my mask on. So I'm social distancing. But here's the great thing, right? Here's the great number. 75% of Americans are saying that, or of New Yorkers are saying that they are finding a new joy of family time, right? They're experiencing family time like they never have before. And they are saying, wow, we really appreciate this time. I think we live in a fast paced world. Family time is not what it used to be. Even when I was your age, when I was a teenager, decades and decades, it is decades ago now, like 3 decades ago. I'm 30 years older than you guys. So people are saying, well, playing a board game or sitting around watching the tube together, the TV, making a meal together is something that is important. And like for me and we've always done this, like in our household, even when the boys were young. Hey guys, set the table. Hey guys, I need you to do this. When mealtime comes around and we don't answer the phone and we don't have the TV, every once in a while we'll do, hey, let's watch a movie. Let's have Taco Tuesday, and we set up like a little buffet of, tacos and nachos and crap like that. We'll set that up on the dining room table, but then we'll watch, I don't know, we'll watch a Star Wars movie or Lord of the Rings movie or something cool like that. So we do that, but a lot of times, we make dinner as a family. And my older son is like the grill master. Like I honestly think that if I didn't let him grill, he'd be ticked. And we started this a couple years ago, where I showed him how to turn on the grill, and I said, whatever we're cooking, I would just say, okay, we're making a steak, cook it for 4, or cook it maybe on medium heat for 7 minutes on one side, 7 minutes on the other, or whatever. And now after doing it for a couple years, he just does it. My older son always does the salad. I do this, I do that. I mean, we make sure that we have that family time, and we always have. But families are starting to find that again, and they're starting to do it again. And I wonder, how many of you guys are starting to find that and do that again. So that's really cool. That's cool to hear. All right. What else do we have? Oh, I guess in Vermont, and I think that some other states are starting to do this as well, is that they haven't necessarily closed down all non. Chris, I'll be in office hours tomorrow. We could talk about portfolio project tomorrow, my friend, which is okay because they're not due until Wednesday. But now, so in Vermont, basically what they're doing is they're taking a little bit of a different turn. They're saying that stores can stay open, but you can't sell non-essential stuff. So meaning like if you went to Walmart and you went to get milk and eggs and cat food, you couldn't buy Time magazine, I guess is what they mean. So I think that probably helps to keep more places open. But how do you enforce that, right? Whenever a rule is, or a law or a regulation is enacted, you typically want the people that write that law or regulation or rule to be able to enforce it. So how do you really enforce it? I don't know, and I don't have the answer to it. So okay, here we go. This day in history. This has become one of my favorite parts of this. So in 1830, we're going back to 1830. On this day in Fayette, New York, which is out towards like Rochester, the Mormon Church was established, right? The Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints. This was the day that it began. And today we know that the Mormon Church or Mormons left New York to travel out to Illinois, not Illinois, to Illinois, and then they later moved out to Utah and the Great Salt Lake. And that's because their brand of religion or their religion practiced something that at the time in 1830 a lot of people didn't care for, and that's right, polygamy, right? Men were allowed to marry several women. On this day in 1841, President John Tyler was sworn in as the 10th president, I believe. And that's because William Henry Harrison, who had been sworn in as president 1 month earlier, died of pneumonia. And I guess he had caught pneumonia. I don't know a lot about him, but I believe he died of pneumonia. He had it was a very cold day, the day he was sworn in, and he refused to wear a coat to stay warm, caught pneumonia, got sick, and then died about a month later. In 1862, yes, is that what our next year is? Yep, 1862, sorry. The Battle of Shiloh takes place in the Civil War, during the Civil War. And the significance of that battle, it's out in the western part of the country at the time, or I guess we would say the Midwest. It's a battle out in Tennessee, and it's one of the biggest battles so far. And if my memory serves, more men died if you add up all the Americans that died in the battle, meaning Confederates and federal troops. More men had died in that battle than in all the wars that had preceded the Civil War. So the American Revolution, the War of 1812, the Quasi War, the Mexican American War, if you add up all the deaths of all those wars, more men died on this day at the Battle of Shiloh than all the American soldiers leading up to it. And the, I guess, kind of ironic name is that the word Shiloh means peace or place of peace. But up until that point in the Civil War, it had been the deadliest battle. In 1868, we're doing a little international history here. Meiji, the Emperor Meiji of Japan, signs the Charter Oath. And what the Charter Oath is that it begins to open up Japan back into a society and a government and a country where it's now going to start to interact with the rest of the world. If you guys remember from your global studies, Japan kind of secludes itself for a couple hundred years, and now this new emperor Meiji, and this was one of the things that begins the Meiji Restoration, says we need to modernize, right? The country needs to the empire of Japan needs to modernize. This is a cool one. In 1909, Admiral Robert Peary, this is a guy who had spent his whole life in the Navy and had become an explorer. I believe this was his third try to reach the actual North Pole. And he successfully gets to the North Pole on this day in 1909. And I guess one of the things that there had been some controversy about is, a lot of these guys were really good in regards to distances and measuring longitude and latitude and all this kind of stuff. And I guess what people found out going back later was that it looks like he more than likely, I think on an earlier adventure, had actually hit the North Pole, but he miscalculated something. So he may have actually hit it, but something was wrong with the math. So stay in algebra, stay in geometry, and algebra 2. That's probably what you guys are in now. Because one day you might have to go to the North Pole and calculate where you are. Duh. Okay. Last for this day in history, one of the things we'll start talking about during the Cold War, one of the probably the worst war during the Cold War, actual war or conflict that we take part in, the Vietnam War, uh, it, during the presidency of Lyndon Baines Johnson, that's who takes over. LBJ takes over for Kennedy after Kennedy is assassinated. Uh, he greatly escalates the war. And on this day, he starts to say, okay, we need to start committing in 1965. He commits a huge ground force to winning that war, or conflict. Again, war is never declared. Um, but the war takes a big turn. The war takes a big turn, and it will continue to take a bigger turn. And Lyndon Baines Johnson will continue to escalate the Vietnam War until his successor, Richard Nixon. We talked about that last night, I think, or 2 nights ago. No, last night. Richard Nixon will start to really say, okay, we got to turn things over. We got to really hand this conflict back over to the South Vietnamese, and have them end this war. So, anyways, guys, we started a new book. We're rocking and rolling. We're seeing some good things come out of our state. We might be really kind of taking a turn with this coronavirus thing, but it looks like we're not going to see each other for another month, which, some of you could be like, woo, all right, great, that's awesome. But I don't know. Generally speaking, I think a lot of us kind of want to get back to our regular swing of things. Oh, you guys didn't remind me. I wanted to tell you about my Poland story. So one of the things about this book that reminds me of when I went to Poland. I went to Poland and I went to Belarus in 2006 and again in 2008. And we brought students from Siena to, we rebuilt Jewish cemeteries that had been destroyed during World War II. And we were in Poland to study a lot of the different historic sites of World War II and the Holocaust. We traveled to the different ghettos and cemeteries. We went to Auschwitz. We went to Krakow, which is where, if you're familiar with the movie Schindler's List and book Schindler's List, that's where Schindler's factory is. And anyways, so this, when we're reading about this wedding here, it really reminded me of Eastern European people, because I'll tell you, boy, do they love their music. Did they love to eat? Did they love to drink? And the both times I went, we stayed with families and we celebrated with our new friends, and you never had an empty plate. I mean, you just didn't. Everything was family style, tons of food everywhere. And if like when you drank, you didn't drink we did have beer. Okay. I was 21, so I could have beer. Even though I think in Poland, I think the drinking age might be 16 or 18, but nobody really cares. But anyways, it was like when you sat down and you were socializing with people, it was about good food, it was about good conversation, and there was good beer and vodka. And when the second trip, we had restored this pretty big cemetery, and we had the celebration in the cafeteria. Is actually in the cafeteria of the school, which was kind of surprising. And oh no, that was on the first trip. And we had this huge, I don't know, 50-foot long table, and there must have the sausages and cheese and this and that, all this different stuff. You gained like 5 pounds just looking at it. But they would give a toast, and and instead of having a big glass of like a mixed drink, they don't do that. You have a little tiny glass of vodka. So ooh, boom, salute, and you would take you take a drink of the vodka, and then bam, like they were right on you, and somebody was pouring some more, and then they would give another toast. You're like, boom, there you go, and they were giving you more, and they were telling you to eat, and they were kissing you, and they were hugging you, and they were giving you more vodka. And I was like, what is happening here? Because, that just doesn't happen in our country, right? We don't come together that way. And one of the things I really noticed that was very different was the people when you walked, and maybe I did tell you guys this story now that I'm thinking about it. Like when you walk down the street in Minsk or in Warsaw, like people look you in the eyes. Like it's just weird, right? You're walking down the street, and I remember I was walking down the street, and these, two, I don't know, maybe like 30-year-old women, very, and they kind of looked like, like supermodels, like they were like really tall, blonde, and really two beautiful women walking down the street. I'm just walking down the street with a couple of the other chaperones on the trip, and and they're just looking right at us. They're staring us right in the eyes, and I was like, wow, that's kind of weird. Like, you just, how often that happened. Like you're walking in the mall and you make eye contact with somebody, and then you look down or you look away, or so it's just so different, like how they socialize. Like when they sit down to dinner, they sit down for hours. There's no texting, and there's no we gotta get up and get through this, and let's get dinner done in 8 minutes. And there was no fast food. It was sitting down and socializing for hours, which is great. And that's what our reading tonight kind of reminded me of. We had actually, the first time I was in Poland, we had been doing a big tour of Warsaw, and 85% of the city was destroyed during World War II. And so, like, the whole city is this square block, utilitarian Soviet, boring arc. It just looks like boxes, the architecture. Like if you look down one of the big avenues, but 15% of the city, the old town, it's like you walk into this part of of Warsaw, and you see these cathedrals that are from like the 12th century, and all of these, it's like you're back in like a medieval village in the Lord of the Rings or something like that. And anyway, so we toured the city, we saw all this cool stuff. We made our way to the old town, and we walked into this bar, and it was called Getty's, which is, interestingly enough, one of my favorite restaurant slash bars in Bar Harbor, Maine. So I was like, and it wasn't like the same logo or anything, but I was like, oh, this okay, let's give it a try. So we go in, and this kind of stereotypical bald Polish, like, I don't know, just kind of husky kind of dude comes up to us, and he's got an apron on, and and it's really cool because it was like all stones, and a big fireplace and all this stonework, and really, really cool, like, pub restaurant. And he comes up to us, right, and he goes, okay, right? And he just, I'm waiting for him to give us menus, and he looks at us. Oh, there's 5 of you. Okay, are you guys thirsty? Yeah, yeah, we're pretty thirsty. Yeah, you hungry? Yeah, yeah, we're hungry. And he walks away. Right. So I thought, okay, well, the guy's going to go get us, some menus or whatever. And so he just comes back with this big pitcher or this big platter of beers. Right. And I'm not talking like little beers, these big mugs of beer. Right. Like, whoa, all right. Well, hey, what the heck? Right. So we're having our beers. A couple minutes later, he comes back, and he's got 3 huge trays of pierogies. And pierogies are this, yeah, again, kind of a stereotypical Polish meal. And it's like kind of like raviolis, like everybody's probably had a ravioli, but they're stuffed with like potatoes and meats and spices, and all this other good stuff. So, we're chomping on these pierogies, and he comes back over, and he's got his little clipboard or whatever. And are you guys, how are you guys doing? Are you still hungry? Are you still thirsty? He said, oh yeah, we could have some more beer, and, we're still hungry. So he comes back over with, more beers, and we're having the beers, and we're just hanging out, and we're just talking. And he comes out with this like huge thing of bread, right? And we're like, whoa, holy cow. And then he pulls the top off the bread, and inside the bread are huge chunks of sausage and peppers and onions and all this kind of stuff mixed together, right? And we're like, oh my God, this is great. Because we had walked all day long, right? So we started chomping, we're chomping away. He comes back, I don't know how much longer, and I think he had brought us a couple more beers in the meantime. And, and he still got his, how you guys doing? Are you guys still hungry? Are you still thirsty? Yeah, man, we walked miles today and whatever. So he comes back with more beer, and he comes back with a full duck on this platter. So at no point in time did we ever see a menu. The guy just kept bringing us this great beer and all this great food. And, it's like at the end, we're like, oh my God, we could barely walk. But it was just fabulous. And like 4 hours had passed, and we had just sat there and talked, and there was music, and there was beer, and there was great food. And it just felt really, really good to not feel like the pressure of just get through it and move on to something else. So, if I hit the lottery, boy, I would go back to Eastern Europe. I mean, really, generally speaking, where I've been in Europe, it is a lot like that. It's much more laid back. You're not being pushed out of a restaurant, and you're not being forced to get through it and move on. There's something very appealing about it. So I think that people like in our country are starting to experience that a little bit, which is kind of cool. And like I said, I've always kind of done that with my kids, and especially at meal times. And every once in a while, I'll see my son, and he's under the table, kind of texting or something. And I'll just no, cut it, stop it. This is the 30 minutes that we're gonna have together. Just let it be. So I hope you guys are having that too, and I hope you always do have it. I hope you always do have it. So anyway, we've started our second book. Mr. Martin is reading all these crazy Lithuanian names. I'm glad I didn't have to sing in Lithuanian tonight. But cool stuff. We've started The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, and we'll read more tomorrow. So have a great night, guys. And, if you need any help, Chris, if you're still out there, please come and see me tomorrow during office hours, or email me, and we'll set up another time if you have anything you need to do in regards to classwork. But I miss you. I want to be in class with you, and I hope we get there soon. So have a great night, and have fun, my friends.